Winners win. I'm a winner. We're going to win.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_GB. Coming at you this Tuesday evening. Co-host Will Miles at Will Miles SEC right there on X as well. Transfer portal. Let's see. Kind of winding down. We've seen it slowing down a bit, after a flurry last week, Will. We got to discuss some of it last Tuesday, and we were still wondering the retainment side of the roster for the five that we really wanted to keep had made their decisions already. We were coming off the Jadan Baugh announcement last Tuesday, and would Florida keep Jaden Woods? Well, Florida kept Jaden Woods, so we get that one. Will's reaction there. We did talk about it last week, of course, there, but now we're going to talk about it a little bit more because now the transfer portal has been going on long enough. We've seen enough additions to the roster or retainment of the roster where we got an idea, and kind of the title of the episode, Retainment and Familiarity, hope to drive success for 2026, because that's what Florida had to do. There was a group of guys that we knew we wanted to keep, we knew we wanted to retain from the last roster. Florida goes 5 for 5 in that group. Everybody had just kind of grouped together. And then with the transfer portal, some familiarity. And we're going to go into some angles of that. So mainly Buster Faulkner coming in as the offensive coordinator, and a lot of Georgia Tech guys, and Phil Trautwein with Penn State, and a couple of offensive linemen there. So mostly on the offensive side of the ball, where the familiarity is really going to kick in. But, Will, it's been about a week and a half of the transfer portal. Got a few more days, and Gators over 20 guys that they've brought into the transfer portal. So certainly, and since you've been on, talked about the connections, Florida got a big one. Wide receiver Eric Singleton Jr. comes in. Productive wide receiver from Auburn and from Georgia Tech, of course. We'll get into that. But, man, it's just been fast and furious in the last week or so.
Yeah, it's interesting. I almost equate this, and I think it's new for everybody in terms of, well, it's clearly new for everybody in terms of this transfer portal window. There's always been more time, right? Like if you couldn't get it done in the fall, then there was a spring window to get it done. That doesn't necessarily exist anymore, at least not until somebody sues to open up and decide to transfer in March or April. So, we've had stuff where guys have committed and then flipped a day later. We've had, there was the story with Lagway committing to Baylor, and then stories he was going to go on official visits elsewhere, that he sort of had to put the kibosh on. So rumors running wild. Certainly, got boosters talking about how much money guys are demanding and that sort of stuff as well. So we are getting some idea. There was something, I think Ross Dellinger leaked a proposed NIL deal that LSU had with someone, or at least had put in front of somebody. So sort of get an idea on how people are funding these things, and the fact that the NCAA clearinghouse, or the not NCAA clearinghouse, but the clearinghouse for these NIL deals has to approve them. There's a bunch of them that are sort of in limbo, so the players aren't getting paid yet. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens if those deals don't necessarily come to fruition. So there's still a lot to go on, but I kind of liken this to like an auction. Like if you go to an auction and they put like the big, usually they start with like the inexpensive items and then go to like the expensive items as the night wears on. I think this is sort of maybe the reverse of that, where like everybody wants to make sure they don't get outbid early on. Like, we need to fill this spot. Quarterback was one, I think, specifically we can look at. And I'm curious to see on the back end here in the last few days whether there's some bargains to be had, right? The idea that the transfer portal is pretty saturated. There's a lot of players out there. Like I think I saw last week somebody said there were like 188 quarterbacks that were in the transfer portal, and there's only 132 spots in FBS. So 50 teams are going to get a backup quarterback somewhere, right? Or at least bring somebody in to compete. And so,
or the unfortunate angle of it, those guys are not going to have roster spots anywhere.
Well, and that may be true too, but I guess my point is that if you see a diamond in the rough in those 50, it was like 4,000 players in the transfer portal. I guarantee you the quarterback position is not the only one where there's excess supply. Now, it's just like anything in life, like the truly, truly quality players like the ones that everybody can immediately identify as this guy's going to be good or this guy's going to be a difference maker, those guys were off the board relatively quickly. The thing I'm really interested in seeing is the guys who come off the board late. What do they bring to the table? How does the organization? So you think about Florida bringing in a GM, think about Sumrall sort of working at lower levels in college football, but the scouting sort of apparatus now becomes important because every year you got to reload, and every year I think there're going to be some deals on the back end. So, like, is there an opportunity to bring in a guy who clearly understands he's the backup quarterback, but will be able to actually be a functional player if the starting quarterback goes down? Now, Florida has Tramel Jones as well. Obviously, Will Griffith coming in. And so, whether Florida needs that spot at quarterback is an open question. But what about linebacker? What about offensive tackle? What about defensive line? Like, those sorts of positions now are places where I don't think you're bringing in starters now who are going to, be all SEC players. I mean, maybe you get lucky and somebody turns into that. I think what you're really looking to do is sort of build insurance, right? You're building depth for the fact that you're not going to be playing 9 SEC games and you're going to need to stay healthy. And going from a guy who's a star to a guy who's like below replacement level really is going to sink your team versus if you've got like a replacement level guy behind him. I think that's where a lot of the familiarity comes in too, right? Is that if you're taking big swings on guys like Eric Singleton, then you got to save somewhere, right? And so it may not be that the money is cheaper for Harrison Moore, the interior offensive lineman from Georgia Tech, or TJ Shanahan, the interior offensive lineman from Penn State, but the expectation there is that Trautwein and Faulkner know exactly what they're getting.
Yeah.
So on a per dollar basis, are you getting value? And this really has become a Moneyball exercise at this point, right? It's, we essentially have a salary cap, or at least what your boosters have brought in, what your Florida Victorious has brought in, what the organization is able to spend because of the House settlement. And so what your budget is. And now the question is, how do you budget? You've probably, before the season even started, before the portal even opened, before the signing day, you sort of set out, this is what we want to spend on each position. And, the problem is if you go over budget on one, you got to go under someplace. How close Florida stuck to those numbers for each position, and versus where did they get some deals versus where did they have to overpay are all questions I don't think we'll necessarily know what was on their board. But I do think there are probably some deals to be had as they really as they really finish out the roster, trying to find those backups and guys who are going to be solid contributors, even if they're not necessarily starters.
All right, good deal. So, like I said, a lot of we'll get into some other transfer portal news and nuggets before too, but kind of really hitting home the retainment familiarity side of the roster right now to the transfer portal, and then, like I said, retaining the guys that we also wanted to keep right here for the Gators. So everybody hit that like button, comment as well, subscribe right here on YouTube if you're watching live or watching the replay. But that like button, that really, really helps us out. But hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, what you waiting on? One more thing to kind of just help us support Gators Breakdown. There's been a lot of support, but you guys, thank you so much. And one big avenue of that support, Gators Breakdown Plus. Start at $3 a month. Go to gatorsbreakdownplus.com. And you can join there. Discord hopping right now. Of course, just so much news going on with the portal. And, if you want to keep up with it, one good way to do it right there on that Discord, gatorsbreakdownplus.com. Also, ad-free episodes of Gators Breakdown happening for you right there on the Gators Breakdown Plus podcast feed. And one more game to go. It is the national championship. It's Indiana. It is Miami. And no better time to get in on the action of that game than right there at MyBookie. National Championship of College Football Playoff is a great time. Miami gets to stay at home as Indiana looks to cap off a perfect season. Hoosiers been dominating so far in College Football Playoff. Currently 9-point favorites over the Hurricanes, with an over-under for the game set at 47.5. Get in on the title betting action right there at MyBookie, of course. All the exciting NFL playoff action as well. Go bet it all right there at MyBookie. One-stop sportsbook and casino in one account, one wallet. Bet some football. Then go play those casino games right there at MyBookie. No switching apps. Don't have to jump to another platform. Straight up action right there at MyBookie. And if you're new, use our promo code Gators. Get your first bet up to $500 fully covered. Make your play. If it doesn't hit, you get it right back with the bet back bonus. So sign up at mybookie.ag with promo code Gators and go claim your bet back bonus. All right, Will. So let's go back a little bit. I don't want to know how much, or I don't know how much you want to add to what you had to say last week, as we were still waiting on word of Jaden Woods if he was going to stick or go to Texas. But Florida retains him as well. And in that group of Jaden Baugh and Vernell Brown III, Dallas Wilson, Miles Graham, Jaden Woods, we were waiting, see if he would just be part of that five that we just did not want to see go. Some other guys, Ben Hanks, Brendan Bett also decided that they were going to stay with Florida too. But there's a group that we just really wanted to stick together, where it's guys that have produced at a very, very high level already, or guys that we just see the potential in great second seasons on the horizon in 2026. So Jaden Woods was one of them. Well, to me, it solidified. Now we see Texas since that go crazy in the transfer portal, but we know they were trying to get Jaden Baugh. We know they were trying to get Dallas Wilson. We know they were trying to get Jaden Woods, and Florida was able to still farm them out of the way and say, no, we're going to retain these guys. Jon Sumrall coming here. We're going to retain these guys. These guys are going to stay in Gainesville. So not only it didn't matter who Florida was competing with for those five guys. You feel great about those guys staying, but it does send to me some, and I don't know what it'll mean in the end, as far as win-loss record or anything like that, but sends a great sign to Gator Nation that, hey, we can, in some form or fashion, in some scenarios, we can go head-to-head with a school like Texas who can go spend money and Florida come out on the winning side.
Yeah, I guess so. If you look at the guys that Florida has retained, you can look at it a lot of different ways. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I looked it up on PFF, and the average rating is like 69 for the guys that Florida has retained publicly through the transfer portal. Now, that doesn't mean they haven't spent more on guys privately to retain them from going to the transfer portal. But I guess my point is the public guys, the Baughs, the Woods, those sorts of guys, the VB3s, the Dallas Wilsons, those guys – PFF ratings around 69. Typically, your average around 64, 65. So you're getting above replacement level value from those guys, or at least you got that last year. Mm-hmm. And most of them have the potential to grow. I think Miles Graham was around 72. You would expect him to grow a little bit as he becomes a junior. Certainly, you would expect the wide receivers to go beyond. They were 69 and 70. Limited snaps for Wilson, but still. Above replacement level play. And certainly the same thing when it comes to Jaden Woods at defensive end too. Again, relatively limited snaps over the course of the year. He wasn't playing every snap, but above replacement level. If you look at the guys who left, like the Mekhi Burrows and those sorts of guys, the average rating the average PFF rating was slightly below that sort of replacement level space. And so to me, that's the thing, right? Is that if you're going to spend money, you got to spend it on guys who are going to bring above replacement level value, especially if you're spending real money to bring those guys in. And it's still, I said this last week, and I think it's still true, which is that really we're talking about production per dollar. Right. And so we don't know exactly what these guys have gotten. In fact, we could probably guess, and there was some stuff going out I can't remember who put it out there, but somebody put it out there on X, sort of what the ranges were for the different positions. And it makes sense. It sort of correlates to the NFL salary cap based on a $30 million cap for college. That's kind of where this is going. The house settlement somewhere in the $20 million. So there's an amount being added by NIL deals to all these things that is skewing the number in some capacity. But I guess so, as long as Florida stayed within those sort of budgetary restrictions, then great. But the thing is that if you're negotiating a deal with, if one person is negotiating a deal with two different entities, he might take the best deal financially. It helps that there's no state income tax in Florida, though certainly Texas that exists too.
Yep.
And then the other aspect of it, and I think this is underrated. So I saw Clay Travis tweet something yesterday where, that players are, for relatively small amounts of money, foregoing the part of college football where they become members of the community. So you see guys like Brandon Spikes come back to Florida. Certainly Tim Tebow can come back to Florida. Danny Werfel was on the search committee for this particular, for this hire of Jon Sumrall. But you got guys like when I went to the Florida State game, you had Kadarius Toney and Tyree Cleveland who came back for that game. And so I do think that those are the sorts of things that you can sell in Gainesville that you can't sell at Texas if someone's already spent a year in Gainesville, right? Like I do think there are non-monetary concern or considerations for all of these guys. And I'll tell you, I think the biggest thing that I take from it is because I expect the money was probably pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is that the guys are comfortable that Sumrall's going to win. Because if you just said, I want to win, and you looked at Texas and you looked at Florida over the last 3 or 4 years, if the money was equivalent, you'd go to Texas.
And that was the thought with Jaden Woods, that he wanted to go somewhere he could win more. And the money was comparable. So hopefully I like your point, because that was supposedly a big point with him.
Well, and I mean, I think that's probably a big point with all of them, right?
True.
Like, how miserable must that season have been for those guys to basically like get patted on the back, like they're, like they're special cases for going out there and playing hard in games to try to save Billy Napier, like the 4th game of the season, right? We're sitting there going, well, they went out there and they played hard. Good for them. Like Napier was able to keep them playing hard. Like, that's not what any of these guys do. I mean, these guys all went to big time high school programs for the most part. They're used to winning. Like, especially like the quarterbacks and the skill position players, like those guys were winning games for their teams at the high school level, right? And so to come into Gainesville and have a season where it's 4-8, it's a slog, and you've got a coaching change in the middle of the season, and you got to essentially recommit to a coach who you don't know that well coming in. So, one, I think Sumrall's done a really nice job of building relationships with these guys if they want to stay. But 2, they're buying the winners win and we're going to win line that you open up the podcast with. Now, time will tell, right? I mean, if they end up 6-6 this year and they go, you told us we were going to win, and they look over at Texas and Texas is in the playoff, next year it might be a little harder to retain those guys, right? So I think there is immense amounts of value in doing what Indiana was able to do, and maybe not to that extent, but doing what Indiana was able to do in terms of showing early on that it is different, right? And that might be a 9-3 or an 8-4 season, but if the team's in every game, if it's highly competitive, if there's like important games in November and potentially December,
if you're in maybe not making the playoff, but in the conversation in November.
Well, and that there's actually some praise on College game day from time to time, right? and that it's not just your own fans crapping on you the whole time. And I mean, it's hard. I mean, when the team is 1-3 and has gotten blown out, or 2-3 and it's gotten blown out a couple of times and lost to USF. I mean, there's not a lot of good to say about it in terms of the football on the field. But that doesn't mean there weren't bright spots, and these are the guys who were the bright spots, right? So, so that's the thing I think I really take away from it, is that Sumrall was able to come in, was able to convince these guys that ostensibly, I mean, the only thing I could think that would get me to stay is if I was really bought in that the guy was going to get us to win. And then all the ancillary stuff starts to matter, right? If the money is really close, if it's if it's 50 grand one way or the other, but I'm comfortable like where I'm at, and I like my teammates, and I really like the new coach who came in, and I think he has a plan to get me to the pros, and like all those ancillary things.
And we can be honest, there's some legacy here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's, I mean, take advantage of it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's not going to be every coaching change where you have Ernest Graham's kid and Vernell Brown Jr.'s kid on the team. You can't lose those guys, right? Like, you were given a leg up when it came to bringing those guys in. But you still have to convince them you're going to win.
Exactly.
And if Miles Graham didn't think he had a path to the NFL, I think his dad would tell him go someplace else, right? I think all things being equal, he would stay. But it's the same thing with Dallas Wilson. If Dallas Wilson doesn't see a clear path to the NFL, if he doesn't see a clear path to production, if he doesn't see a clear path to winning, why wouldn't you go someplace?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, look, you can go to Kentucky and win 4 games. Like, so, you can go to Vanderbilt and maybe win more than 4 the way they've been playing recently. So, the college football landscape has changed. I think we're going to see some shifts back towards the big boys. I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now, where some of them are asserting themselves when it comes to the transfer portal. I think that'll become even more realistic next year. As the
You're saying that on the heels of Indiana about to play for a title.
Well, so yes. And look, I grew up in Indiana. I was an Indiana fan as a kid. Probably would have gone to Indiana if my family hadn't moved down to Florida when I was 16. So, I mean, this is something I'm enjoying watching and enjoying living vicariously through my father who went there. But
I
But
still say as a whole, yes, I do agree with you. But you're still going to have programs like Indiana who in this new landscape come up and then take advantage. And I do still wonder about the staying power. We'll
I
see.
mean, so I guess we would have said the same thing about Oregon 30 years ago, right?
Right.
Like, and so Oregon made themselves into a traditional power in college football. But if you think about, like, 1990, was it 1990? The Colorado and Georgia Tech split the national championship, and those guys haven't sniffed anything since. There were a couple of Cordell Stewart years in there at Colorado, but those programs did not become powerhouses, and Georgia Tech's been under the boot of Georgia basically ever since. And Colorado got dominated by Nebraska for years when they were in the Big 12. And, now they're not really even competitive for the most part where they're at now. So I think college football has always had these outliers that have popped up from time to time. And in a condition of constant change, people can take advantage of that, right? Like Curt Cignetti is not going to have the advantage of being able to take his entire JMU team to Indiana next year because he's been the Indiana coach, right? Like, so, and then the expectations at Indiana are about to get higher. Now, look, they may springboard this into something different, but it's not like Illinois is this dominant team. Purdue didn't do it. I think Cignetti is a very special case.
Yeah.
And the thing that Indiana's got that people haven't in the past is Indiana's got the funds to keep Cignetti. Right. They've put a path in front of him that makes him stay, because 20 years ago, Cignetti would have done this at Indiana. Actually, he would have done what he did last year at Indiana, and he would have immediately been at LSU or Florida or Auburn or Ohio State or something like that. Right. And Indiana managed to sign him this year to an extension and really got ahead of all of the coaching, all the firings and all that sort of stuff. And he was willing to stay there. So I think college football has changed a little bit, but at the same time, I think that Florida is still positioned in a way that other folks envy, both from a funding perspective, a size of alumni perspective, and then also the history matters, assuming you've got the right guy at coach. And, if Indiana had Lee Corso as head coach, they'd be doing what they did when Lee Corso was the coach. I think the fact that they have Cignetti matters, and hopefully,
not so fast, my friend.
Hopefully we're saying that 2 years from now about Jon Sumrall, right? Sure. That we got the right guy in here. And when you get the right guy, the snowball starts rolling downhill, and that snowball gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it rolls. But if you have to push that snowball up the hill, it's if you're always fighting against yourself, fighting against your inability to get 11 guys on the field, fighting against your ability to sort of like set out the vision for the organization, then it can be a struggle. So, again, I think everybody sort of looked and said, prove it, when Sumrall said winners win. I think this is kind of the first salvo on that, right? I'm still waiting. You got to win some games on the field in order to convince me at this point, right? And we can talk about roster construction and all that sort of stuff, but at the same time, he can only do what he can do right now. And retaining guys, to me, because I think it's a Moneyball problem, it's a Moneyball solution, which is that you may not have stars at every position. What you need to make sure of is you don't have gaping holes at specific positions. And then you got to identify some stars in various locations. So, is Philo going to be a star at quarterback? Maybe, maybe not. But that was a gaping hole for Florida last year. Like, the quarterback play was so bad at various periods of time that Florida lost games that they otherwise could have won because they got poor or below average quarterback play. Like the LSU game, like just average quarterback play, and Florida wins that game. The Miami game, I think they still lose. I think there's
South Florida
with average quarterback play, they win. I think Mississippi, I think they probably win with average quarterback play. I think, so you can sort of, they certainly would have done better against Miami than like the 65 yards passing if they had average quarterback play. And again, I like Lagway. I hope he does well at Baylor, but I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that the quarterback play wasn't very good. So just getting that to like average or replacement level, like basically if we put any starter for the NCAA in here, this is approximately what we would get. Florida was below that last year. So just raising that up to average means the team's better. And so you can look at like safety and say that. You can probably look at corner and say that. You can't look at running back and say that, right? Yep. That was one of those places where they were above average. I think you can look at wide receiver and you can say that, given the fact that we didn't really get what we thought maybe we were getting out of J. Michael Sturdivant coming in, given that Dallas Wilson was injured, given that Trey Wilson didn't really explode in a way that maybe we expected expected him to coming back off an injury. I would say we're maybe replacement level, slightly below. And so, there's an expectation now with some of these guys they're bringing in that is now going to be above replacement. So, offensive line certainly below replacement level, I think, for last year. So I think there are a lot of places where Florida, just by improving a little bit at each of the different position groups, positions themselves to be a significantly better team. And I think beyond the fact that I think that Sumrall has been able to get these returning guys to believe that. And so, I don't think Woods, and I don't think Baugh, and I don't think Graham come back if they don't believe that there's an opportunity to turn this around. And so, to me, that's the big win for Sumrall, and that's the big win when we start talking about, the homegrown guys who are not Sumrall or Faulkner or Brad White guys. Keeping those guys here means they've been able to cast a vision that's effective and that the players have already bought into and believe in.
All right. Well, you just brought it up, and let's go to the other side of it, the familiarity angle with this. And hey, look, you have Buster Faulkner coming in, offensive coordinator, coming from Georgia Tech, and there's now with the connections at Georgia Tech, we'll go through it one more time. Quarterback Aaron Philo, wide receiver Eric Singleton Jr., of course, was at Auburn last year, but at Georgia Tech for 2 years before that. Other wide receiver, Bailey Stockton, tight end, Luke Harpring, offensive lineman, Harrison Moore. That's 5 offensive players, Will, that all have a connection to Faulkner from his Georgia Tech days. And then throw in offensive lineman TJ Shanahan and Egan Boyer from Penn State. Of course, with Phil Trautwein, that's 2 more for a total of 7 guys on offense right there that have a familiarity with the offensive coordinator and a position coach. And then go back to Singleton, as I said. Also, familiarity with Marcus Davis, his wide receiver coach at Auburn this past season as well, to further hit that narrative home even more. And then on defense, there's one with Cam Dooley coming from Kentucky, following defensive coordinator Brad White and co-defensive coordinator Chris Collins following him to Florida. So that's 8 total. And then add in all conference special teamers from Tulane, kicker Patrick Durkin and punter Alec Clark, and that makes 10 of the portal gets that have familiarity with coordinator, position coach, and the like. So now, obviously, your mini coaches taking over for new programs are bringing in guys they're familiar with. Of course, with the transfer portal, it's just going to happen. Now, it is a bit different, Will. I went and looked at it today. You have AAC coach Jon Sumrall coming from Tulane. You also had AAC coach Alex Golesh going to Auburn from USF. If Sumrall is only bringing in special teamers from Tulane, Golesh is bringing 13 players from USF to Auburn. So you go look at now we're looking in the SEC. Lane Kiffin, of course, he's not really bringing Ole Miss players so far to LSU. I went back and looked at Ryan Silverfield from the AAC as well. There's Memphis. He's got 7 Memphis Tigers following him to Arkansas. And then we zoom out a little bit. Let's go to other conferences. Kyle Whittingham, so far, he has 3 players from Utah. Penn State has brought in 7 players from Iowa State following Matt Campbell to Happy Valley. So there were some of the bigger hires, but also comparing AAC guys. Summerall's only bringing special teams guys. So I think when you look at it, I think one of the main reasons for this are his coordinator hires aren't from Tulane. So there's not a push to keep a lot of the same players from Tulane. There are some coaches, of course, that came over from Tulane, some that were coordinators there. But since those guys aren't the ones in charge, probably limits the movement of Tulane players coming to Florida. Now, I believe that's, since Sumrall was the head coach, if he believed that there were guys on that Tulane team that could play at Florida, especially on defense, of course, his side of the ball, his specialty, then probably would fight hard to get those guys here, but it doesn't seem to be the case. And there really hasn't been a ton of word of visits or talks of too many Tulane players to begin with. When you look at it, I thought there would be more. Interestingly enough, there's not. So I think where we really saw the familiarity really take place was on the offense under Faulkner and Trautwein, and in places I think that you like to see it, quarterback and offensive line. I mean, I think it can really pay off at those spots. So, Will, you look at it, you're likely starting quarterback. I think at least 2, if not all 3 of the offensive line transfers could find themselves starting. Now, there's a lot to prove because there's not a lot of starts there. There's only a handful of starts between those guys. So there's your hope of familiarity, and you hope that it pays off.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot of things in there. So, like, if you look at Penn State, I think you said 7, but I think it's like, isn't it like 20
Is
guys
it?
who went from Iowa? Yeah.
Well, I went to on threes. I don't know if they're not on. They're not official or not, but I went to their transfer ins, and that I thought it was more too, but that's all they had listed.
I think I just went to 24/7 and looked and was scrolling. It's like 19
Well,
or 20 guys.
maybe I used the wrong site then, so maybe those numbers were off.
Well, so, but the point I'm making is I think it says something about the health of your program and the health of. So, if I were to look at the amount of guys who are coming in from other programs to Florida, they've essentially plucked the guys who are either gettable or the guys that they think are worthwhile. And I think we hope that they're bringing in the guys who are worthwhile, not just the guys who are gettable. And we're going to be able to tell at the end of this season which one it was, right? So at the end of the season, injuries notwithstanding, if we look and TJ Shanahan is graded out as an average SEC offensive lineman, then they got someone who was worthwhile, right? If he comes in and he grades as like below average and, then it's like, okay, they got who they could get. I tend to lean more towards they're getting the guys that they think are worthwhile getting for a couple of reasons. One is that if you do look at that Penn State example, and it's an extreme example, but that Penn State example, they signed almost no one in the recruiting class, that 2026 recruiting class for early signing day in December. They signed almost no one because they didn't have a coach, right?
Yeah.
And so the folks that they're filling the roster in with Iowa State are stopgaps until they can go build a real recruiting class and a real transfer portal class next year. Now they may have transfers in there similar to the quality that Florida does. I don't know. But the problem is that they've had to fill out the rest of their roster just because there was nothing done in that 2026 recruiting class. I think Sumrall did a pretty nice job holding that 2026 recruiting class together.
Yeah.
19 recruits, but it was ranked 16th overall in the country. And so his need to go into the transfer portal it's need-based, right? It's not, oh my God, I have to bring half my roster because half my roster left. It's I've been able to retain these guys. We just talked about Graham, Woods, Brown, Wilson. And then we're bringing in 19 freshmen who we believe in, and we were able to retain those guys. And now we're sort of supplementing, now strongly, right? Because 30-something guys, I think 32 guys have entered the portal from the Florida side, which means you got to replace those guys. But it's not like 47 people that have to be replaced in the portal like some other programs that have had this sort of turnover. So like you look at North Carolina this year, they have 39 commits in their recruiting class. You look at USC, they have 35 commits in their recruiting class for 2026. In many ways, I think that's because those two programs specifically underused the transfer portal last year and really kind of had to replace numbers when it came to the recruiting. Florida hasn't had to do that because they've been able to retain some of the talent. So to me, it's not even the familiarity piece in as much as it is the question that I said earlier, which is, are these the guys they could get? Or are these the guys they thought were worthwhile? I don't think we'll know the answer until the end of the year. And they're going to miss on some, right? That's just sort of the reality. They will. But in an environment where what you really need to do, at least this is my view, what you really need to do is have stars who can differentiate, and then you need replacement level everywhere else. Like maybe a little bit above, but you don't necessarily need to aim to have the best interior defensive lineman. What you need is somebody who's not going to be a giant gaping hole at interior defensive lineman to allow your linebacker to roam free. And I think, the days of Alabama stockpiling 4 or 5-star guys on the at defensive tackle are over because those guys are going someplace else. And so the idea that Florida is going to be able to do that, I think, is fool's gold as well. You're going to have to identify guys who can hold up when there's an injury or guys who can hold up over the course of an entire season. And so the mark, I think, of this staff is going to be at the end of the year when we go and look at the guys they brought in from the other programs. Were they just depth pieces or were they real solid contributors to the team? And I think, and then we have to have a little bit of grace with exactly what we call someone who's homegrown, quote unquote, right? Because Singleton has a connection to the staff, even if he's coming from Auburn. We wouldn't say, oh, that's like a that's a direct line to Georgia Tech or Penn State or Tulane, but that's somebody who had a connection with the program too. And so,
Yep.
All those things I think factor into it, but certainly the money factors into it as well. So, again, I until I see anything on the field, I hesitate to rank any of this. And anybody who tells you they know doesn't. I think this is one of the things that's been a little bit aggravating over the last couple of weeks, at least for me, is people are like, well, Indiana built this way, so this is the way other teams should build. Or Miami built this way, so this is how other teams should build. Well, here's the deal. Miami and Indiana built these teams 2 years ago.
Yeah, right.
Like, certainly they have supplemented them, but they built these teams 2 years ago and have added pieces over time. The college football landscape is not what it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So you can't build the same way that you did 2 years ago. And so some level of familiarity to bring your systems in, to make sure that everybody is on the same page. In some ways, like, I manage a group, and having people that I trust on the team who will come and tell me when somebody's goofing off or struggling or whatever is a really valuable commodity. So even in that capacity, have somebody who will narc on his teammates because you don't have the relationships with them, I think it can sometimes be an effective thing. So, I guess if they were bringing in 37 people from Tulane, I'd be a little bit worried.
Yeah.
Because I saw Tulane play in the playoff, and there was a difference in terms of them and their opponent.
There's probably got to be a blend. I mean, going to your point there before we get off on that, because going to your point of the Cignetti thing and him bringing so many players from James Madison, well, it turns out he really identified pretty well and developed pretty well. I mean, he really identified the guys. And don't get me wrong, I do think there is something to those guys being grown men by now. They stayed, they're super seniors, they're fifth-year guys, and they outperformed a lot of the 4 or 5-star talent that you see at Oregon and Alabama, of course. But I mean, I don't think you're going to see this big shift of Sun Belt team or Sun Belt coaches, AAC coaches say, well, you know what? All right, maybe I need to bring 30, 40 players in from the school I just left. Because no, I just think Cignetti just might be that special. And I don't want to see, sorry, going to your point, I didn't want to see Jon Sumrall do that either. But I think Auburn's going to be an interesting case. Now, he's not bringing that many guys goalless in from USF to Auburn, but there's some familiarity there. He's bringing a good bit. I did go back and look at the numbers. I was right on all those numbers except for, you're right, Penn State, Iowa State. They were like over 20. All the other numbers were good. I don't know where On3 is really behind on that one, but it is going to be interesting because, going to your point, so many people are pointing, look at what Cignetti did and how he did it. You're not bringing 30, 40 guys from AAC and Sunbelt teams, I think, and having success like that.
Well, I mean, I think the point is that Cignetti is one of one. Right.
Yeah.
And I would rather, like, if somebody's going to make the argument that we've learned about how we need to build teams, I would much rather than make that argument in relation to Miami.
Yeah.
I look at the Hurricanes and I go, like, that is, at least it gives you a chance in this year's in the way the tournament is set up at this point, that if you're strong up front, you're going to have a chance to win, even in circumstances where maybe you don't do that every game, right? So, look, I'm an exclusionary when it comes to college football. I hate the fact that 2-loss teams are getting in these playoffs.
Same.
But the idea that a 2-loss team can't beat a 1-loss team or a 0-loss team in college football, like, of course they can. Right. I think the point I've always made is that if you made it through the gauntlet of, say, the SEC, like, there's and in this case, the Big Ten, I think too, there should be a reward for that. Right. that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. Look, Indiana's in the Big Ten. So, I mean, look, more power to them, but this is historically abnormal what we're seeing in Indiana. Like, you cannot find a comp for this level of talent turning into this kind of juggernaut. And so, can Cignetti catch lightning in a bottle multiple years? That'll be interesting. Is Cignetti going to all of a sudden be a much better recruiter now that he's got a team that's capable of doing this? Like, I don't think he's going to turn down 4- and 5-star guys who come his way when he has the opportunity and he thinks it makes sense from a high school perspective moving forward. I think what will happen is that, and especially with Cuban backing up that program, and I mean, and this is something it was so funny to see all the football writers go, I had no idea Indiana had such a large alumni base. And I'm like, I did. I followed their basketball program. That place is crazy. Like Indiana basketball Twitter. I was not around for Indiana basketball Twitter, but I bet you that Indiana basketball Twitter is fairly similar to Gator Twitter when it comes to going after the coaches and all that sort of stuff. Because Indiana's a basketball crazed place, but this is such a historical outlier that I just look at it and I go, you can't build that way. And the other thing is, long time ago, I was reading a book and somebody talked about basically that your goal in business is you either have to be the best hot dog out of the hot dog stands, or you have to be the only hot dog, right? That if people are hungry and you got a crappy hot dog, but you're the only one available, everyone will come in and buy it. And and the point that I took from that was that if you follow someone else, you're making your life harder overall, right? So like if you try to build like Miami did or build like Indiana did, you're going to run into problems because Indiana's already good at it.
Right.
Miami's already good at it. And so if you try to build in the exact same way, you're competing with them and your resources are going to go to the exact same people that their resources would have gone to. So the thing I've been harping on, it's why I asked for Andrew Friedman when everything was open. And they kind of did. I mean, Howie Roseman's protege from the Eagles in Caldwell is sort of fitting that mold, assuming that he's doing what I want him to be doing. But really trying to figure out, where do you find value in the way talent is dispersed within college football, and can Sumrall do that in a way that is differentiated from the other folks in the SEC that he's competing with? Time will tell, right? I mean, I think part of it, sometimes you can just have bigger coffers, right? I mean, Alabama had much better Charger dealers than other folks when Saban was there, and that made a difference. And I think Mark Cuban being at Indiana and Phil Knight being at Oregon is going to make a difference when it comes to this playoff stuff. But, it's not like Florida has no money in the coffers. It's not like Florida can't compete for the most part with most big boys. But it is going to come down to evaluation. And so if you take what I said earlier, which is that Sumrall is selling people clearly on, I'm a winner, I win, we're going to win. And then he was able to convince these guys who are coming back of that very thing. Well, how else do you get there other than bringing in people that you're familiar with, that you go, these guys can help us win? Right? Like they will contribute something. We know they will contribute something. Like they are a sure bet, right? We're not going to have somebody come in who's a culture problem. We're not going to have somebody come in who isn't with the program. We're going to have people come in where we've seen flashes, even maybe if they've struggled on the field, or we know that guy had like an injured shoulder. And so his PFF ratings were lower than they could have been because he was dealing through an injury. And hey, by the way, the fact that the guy fought through the injury is impressive as well, right? So we know that he's tough. So you have that inside information that you maybe wouldn't have if it was somebody else. And so if the goal is to win quickly, and if you believe that you have to win to sort of set the vision, cast the vision to bring the next group in, then I think going with familiarity makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, for, like I said, especially for the positions, they're really doing it at quarterback, offensive line. I think it can really pay dividends there, given Buster Faulkner is the OC as well, and that familiarity.
And real quick, Florida, for all the criticism that Billy Napier got, the best transfer he brought was Osiris Torrance.
Yeah.
Right? Like he brought a guy from ULL who turned into just a beast on the Gators offensive line. And that I remember when he came over going, yeah, he was good at Louisiana, but is he going to be good in the SEC? Right.
Yeah.
And
one of his other better ones was Montrell Johnson as well.
Yeah. So, I think, considering what we think of Billy Napier and some of his offensive acumen and some of his projections on different players and those sorts of things, I think we can say that his hit rate at Louisiana from the guys he brought with was pretty good. I mean, Cam Waits, I think if he hadn't blown out his Achilles, might have turned into a good player or a really effective player. And then, like I said, for Torrance and for Montrell Johnson, like you mentioned, got some real value out of those guys. And again, was Montrell Johnson ever the best running back in the conference? No. But was Montreal Johnson a real value add to the organization over multiple years? Absolutely he was. And so I think, if we're expecting Harrison Moore to turn into like an all SEC or all American, that's probably a unrealistic expectation. But if we're looking for Harrison Moore to be a rotation player on an offensive line that pushes guys to be their best and is able to step in when there's an injury and is able to sort of be replacement level, hey, maybe even earn a starting job. Yeah, I think that's something that you can say, okay, that's a valuable piece to an organization. Certainly, a couple years ago we had offensive linemen went down, and all of a sudden, when Eggleston went down, we had Slaughter step in at center, but even then he was relatively young that year.
Yeah.
It took him probably 3 or 4 games to get his sea legs, and in that Utah game especially, Florida had a gaping hole at center. And we did not get replacement level play in that game against Utah, and it showed. And Graham Mertz was under pressure the entire game. The offensive line struggled, and it all kind of stemmed from Eggleston being out and having to have Slaughter in there for his first career start on the road at Utah. And so bringing in guys who, again, can just get you back to replacement level, I think does matter.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Yeah, there we go. Kind of looking at the retainment, the familiarity side of the roster and transfer portal right now for the Gators. A little bit of news and nuggets to let us get out of the rest of this episode. Florida adding some depth pieces through the portal on Monday. UCLA cornerback Kanye Clark took a visit to Gainesville this past weekend. They committed to the Gators. A redshirt sophomore in 2025. He appeared in 9 games at cornerback while making 2 starts at nickel. 6 foot, 190-pound defensive back recorded 23 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 forced fumble, 1 quarterback hurry, 2 pass breakups across 207 defensive snaps. He was ranked number 51st among safeties in the transfer portal, and he brings both experience and immediate depth. But I think nickel, corner, versatile piece here for Florida as Florida tries to figure out the secondary through the transfer portal. And then, as I said, he took back in 2025, this past season, took snaps at cornerback with 80, nickel at 79, and then box safety 41. So, like I said, moved him around a little bit there, did UCLA. Certainly some room for growth. Will allow 14 completions on 16 targets for 166 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tackling's been an issue there as well. He had a 51.5 tackling grade. So certainly I think somebody, a depth piece for Florida, not asking to come in here and start, but certainly somebody who's got some experience playing at a power level. And then one more, UCF linebacker TJ Bullard. Yes, he's the son of Thaddeus Bullard. He'll arrive at Florida as well. 4 tackles, 1 tackle for loss in his career. So not much to write home about there at the linebacker spot. And then some news as well coming out. Brian Taylor entering the portal, a defensive lineman for the Gators, just completed his senior season, played 2 seasons at Blinn College in Texas. He hopes to receive a junior college waiver to get another season of eligibility, according to Pete Nakos of On 3. Of course, he was 6'4.5", 295 pounds, recorded 24 tackles, 15 of them solo, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks in 2025. I think he flashed at points this past season. He played 284 snaps. Previous year, he played in 10 games, 14 tackles, 1 quarterback hurry, 2 tackles for loss. So, and then we'll tack this on because I see people talking about it in the chat. It's been a big topic. Dubster in here gets it started with the thanks for the donation here. He goes, tell Will to take up a love offering so we can get that Colorado guy. And that would be one Jordan Seaton, Colorado offensive tackle. I think LSU is probably the team to be there. It's also reports Florida's high on the list. I don't know how high. Florida's not paying $3 million or whatever it's going to take to get him along the offensive line. I don't see it. I don't think it's happening. I'd love to be wrong on this one. I just, with the way Florida's already constructed the roster to the transfer portal, who they've retained, that's going to cost a pretty penny. Other teams, other programs might have it, might feel the need to go get it. Obviously, when you're looking at one of the best offensive tackles in the country, yeah, you can certainly say that's a need. Florida, I think Florida would love to have him. Every other team out there would love to have him as well. But I just think the cost is going to be too much for Florida in that one. I don't see that one working out in Florida's favorite when it's all said and done. And then also Florida set to host Baylor redshirt sophomore defensive lineman. I hope I'm going to say his name right. Samu Talmanupepe. I hope I said it right. He's supposed to be in for a visit on Thursday. 6'3", 376-pound defensive lineman from Humboldt, Texas. Finished the 2025 season at Baylor with 2 total tackles, both of which were assisted tackles. Not a lot of stats to really go back on. He's a 3-star recruit in 2023 class. You see he earned a red shirt after the 2024 season with the Aggies. Appeared in 3 games there. So PFF has him with 2 snaps in 2023, 20 snaps in 2024 for Texas A&M, with 24 this past season at Baylor. So not a lot of a little over 40 snaps there. So not a lot, but the size you got to like here. 6'3", 376 pounds. Florida's still looking, I think, for a bigger defensive lineman to add to the middle. So I'm going to try and say it one more time. Talmanupepe. I hope I'm saying it right. Probably would be the guy Florida's looking at there. And then South Alabama tight end Trent Thomas, supposed to be visiting Thursday as well. 6'5", 254 pounds from Alabama. Played at South Alabama. Finished the 2025 season with 4 receptions for 34 yards. Be a redshirt junior for the 2026 season. Certainly big body, pretty much blocking tight end style there at 6'5", 254 pounds. So threw a lot at you as we finish up this episode here. News, nuggets, visits, targets. Interesting last few days of the transfer portal, Will.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to go back to Seton for a second.
Yeah.
So if we look at Francis Mauanoa was another 5-star that Florida was in for, offensive tackle. He now plays for Miami. His PFF ratings in 2023 as a true freshman, 68.1. So remember, the average usually 65, 66. Then 70.7 in 914 snaps last year. Then he jumped to 83.1 this year, his junior year, which is a big reason why Miami's able to run the ball. Miami's so physical. If you look at Seton, you are paying for potential. So he's 67.2 in 860 snaps his freshman year and 65.8. So you have to really believe that he's going to take that jump.
Yeah.
And that he went from 860 snaps in 2024 to 561 this year, and his performance went down this year compared to last year. So he sort of kind of stayed the same, whereas Mauanoa, you could see it creeping up and then all of a sudden took a jump. So that's the calculation you're making. And I know everybody looks 5-star, got the tools. I get it. I understand that. I'm one of the people who's been harping on stars for years, but this is one of those where I think you got to be a little careful because you're paying for potential. You're not paying for production. And this also, I think, points out to the risk now of high school recruiting, where if you bring in this 5-star guy at offensive tackle and he comes in for the first couple of years and is just kind of average, but has that potential, is he going to be able to leave for a higher dollar amount? So look, I think Florida came well in under what the typical college cap number is for quarterback, based on everything we've heard about Philo and based on what we've heard about all the other guys who are signing. I think Florida has an advantage in terms of if every team had the same cap, and they don't, but if we assume every team has a very similar cap, then Florida should have extra money to spend someplace else. I'm not convinced that Seton is the place to spend it. But, again, I think sometimes you got to take some swings too. And so I get that the pedigree, if you have the funds available, and this is one of those things where, maybe LSU just goes above and beyond for everybody. But if you have the funds available, and you should, because it feels like you've specifically at the positions where the most money is spent. So quarterback, offensive tackle, edge, wide receiver, and interior defensive line are the areas where typically, at least in the NFL, most folks spend. So I don't know what Florida spent on wide receiver. It feels like they spent an awful lot. Yeah. I think when you go down to running back, I think they spent quite a bit there too. So it maybe they've already sort of blown their wad in terms of the differentiation that they've gotten compared to quarterback. But that is the one place where I would have hope, is that, let's say it was, $1.2 million for Philo to come out. I don't know what it was, but let's say that's what it was. Well, I've got $3.5 million as the college starter number, like the cap number that you would have. So that frees up $2 million to go after other folks. Now, I suspect some of that's tied up in Jaden Baugh. Suspect some of that is tied up in Jaden Woods. But I think that's one of the reasons why Florida's been able to retain those guys, is because they saw someone with potential at the quarterback position. Certainly Buster Faulkner had the relationship with him, but also did not pay the sums that we've seen for like Sam Levitt and that have been floating around, and Sorsby and that sort of stuff, right? And so that does give you an advantage in other places in your roster. So that's the one place where I would have hope. But again, I think the jury's still out on Seton. I don't think that he's shown that he's like an elite college left tackle yet. And so, you better be able to project that and project that well if you're going to spend the money that's necessary to bring him in, because you are paying for that Mawanoa leap from year 2 to year 3. You're not paying for what he's already done. And I think that does make a difference, especially on the offensive line.
Yep. And then somebody says, sorry, Willis, where you have to watch the film and not stats. Caesar was blocking for a true freshman who held the ball, ran into sacks. Well, when PFF does their grades, they're not grading the quarterback on that. They're grading just what he does on that. So that's where, take PFF for whatever it's worth out there. I know some of you like it, some of you don't, but PFF's not blaming, they're not relating his stats to a quarterback. They're relating it just on him. So just because he gave up a sack, if they deem it not his fault, they're not going to they're not going to fault him for that sack. So,
well, and look, I mean, again, we can talk about PFF, we can argue about all that sort of stuff. It's not like Jeremiah Smith, who's clearly the best, who was clearly one of the best wide receivers in the country when he stepped in, right? And look, I mean, 25%, so 75% of the 5-star guys get drafted, but that means 25% of them are busts, right? And so you've now had 2 years to see someone and see the film. And I agree, actually, specifically with the comment that you do need to look at the film, because you need to project. And if he's asking for $2.5 million or more than that, then the flashes that you see better be something that you go, that's something I can coach. That's like the intermittent stuff between the flashes should be stuff where you go, that's something I can coach up. That's something where I can make a difference. And then all of a sudden the flashes are where he like pancakes some guy, where Jaden Baugh's running right behind him. And, all of a sudden the explosives that weren't there last year are there because you've got this guy out there. So it's not to say that Seton's not a good player. It's not to say that Florida shouldn't bring them in. I think it does come down, though, to evaluation, and the fact that you've got 2 years of play as it's not dominant, right? And so, now I think you could say that about just about everybody in the transfer portal. Like, I don't look at Sam Levitt and go, oh my goodness,
same.
What an awesome player, right? So that's the other thing is I do think you got to start, fans get mad when the organization doesn't spend money on everybody.
Yep.
But if you're making projections, you got to spend money on the right projections. And, short of, I know there's been a bunch of rumors, enough that Pat Forty actually put in an article at SI this week about how it was irresponsible to accuse Indiana of cheating. But, short of that, they're doing something unprecedented with their ability to evaluate players. And so, that's who you're competing with now, is organizations that have the ability to really project in a way that ostensibly can bring them significant value by not having to go after that 5-star guy, because Indiana hasn't had to do it. Now, again, I know I said earlier, don't want to build that way. I still believe that, but I think I don't think you ignore the data point. I just don't think you keep it as the only data point.
Correct. Right. Last couple thoughts, and Will, I know you got to go. Bourbon Meyer says, do we trust Westfall at left tackle? And then Joe, Bourbon Meyer said that. And then Joe Patterson said, do you guys think we need a better left tackle? I mean, obviously, there's still some question there. Florida did hit the transfer portal, and I know Egan Boyer transferred from Penn State. Phil Trautwein's high on him to get a shot at left tackle, and also Emeka Ogorji, even though it was terrible PFF and got thrust in as a Stanford true freshman offensive lineman. I know from talking to people, and I know it's been put out in other articles as well, that Trout's very high on him, despite what the PFF grade says, despite, being out there as a true freshman, getting moved around the offensive line on a bad Stanford team at the same time. So, yeah, I mean, you take all that into account, trust what the offensive line coaches see and all that. But, yeah, Westfall, Boyer, Gorgie, yeah, that probably, I think, as of now, unless Florida goes out there and gets another, there's probably in the mix for your left tackle spots right there. I think Caden Jones, basically playing at Florida last year, still kind of shoot in for your right tackle spot.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Florida can always use help on the offensive line.
Always, yeah.
given the last year's history and the last few years' history. But I mean, if there's an option out there, yeah, absolutely, you explore it and you see what it costs and you bring that person in if it makes sense. I don't think Florida's like desperate. I think they'll be able to get, reasonable play at that position with the guys they have on the roster. But I don't think you're going to go, oh yeah, those are guys we run behind, road grader, all SEC, that sort of stuff. So, I think
I wish it was this easy on D's comment. Hell no, I don't trust it yet. Need a better tackle. Get Seton. We need that sure thing. Florida's not getting him unless he's going to take like $2 million. Florida's not getting him. I don't. It's a lot easier to say go get him. It ain't there. I'd be completely shocked, and I'll come up here with egg on my face if I have to.
Well, so the other part of all this, Dave, and this is something that we do need to think about, is that this is so I know Sumrall said, I want to win, winners win, I want to win right away. He's making moves that indicate he believes that and is potentially positioning himself to do that. However, this is not a single year investment. Right? Like there still is a build component to this.
Yeah.
So if you have Seton for 1 year and he helps you go 9-3 instead of 8-4, or you go 8-4 anyway because the players around him aren't good enough to where his value brings you from 8, you're 8-4 with him, 8-4 without him, then it's a waste of $2 million, even if you can bring him in. So this happens in baseball all the time where the time to go all in with your moves is when you're in that 86, 87, 88 win range, because that's what's necessary to make the playoffs. So if you project at 78 wins, you don't want to go spend hundreds of millions of dollars on somebody. He's not going to be good enough to get you to that 88 wins you need to make the playoffs. And if you're at 92 wins, you don't want to go spend millions and millions of dollars on somebody because 92 gets you into the tournament already. And so, that there is this window, and honestly, college football has opened up a window similar to what I'm talking about in baseball, where 10-2 gets you in. And so, there are, depending upon how you want to build the program, would you be better off saving that $2 million bullet for next year? Right. And now you've got 4 for the left tackle position in 2027 when you really need the left tackle because Philo's proven he's pretty good. He's coming back. You've been able to add real studs to the port. Like basically, what's the value add in getting too good in year one, like in continuing to add good players for 1 year in year one, if it doesn't get you to the playoff?
Yeah.
Like there is something to some level of slow build, and I think we need to remember that. Not Billy Napier slow build, but slow build from the standpoint of
smart slow build.
From the value of money, right? Like,
yeah,
if Seton comes in and plays at an elite level, he's going to the NFL.
Yep.
So you get 1 year. So you have to weigh: is it worth the 1 year worth of expenditure for what you're going to get out of it? And the answer might be, there will be another Jordan Seton next year, and that guy will push us over the top in 2027. So I'd rather spend the money on that quality of player at that position in 2027 and maybe paper it over in 2026. Because one, that means we can point at the guy in 2027 and go, see, we need you. And the other part is that you'll know what you have and you'll be able to modify and adjust off of year one. Because if you ask Jon Sumrall in a quiet moment, he would tell you this is not a perfect roster for him.
Right.
Like, and he doesn't expect it to be a perfect roster. The question is it good enough to get 8 or 9 wins? And then what do you have to do from there to bring it more into alignment with what Jon Sumrall's perfect roster would look like? I think there's certainly, you got to spend to get to good enough to where you can then cast the vision to continue to bring in the funds to get to where you want to be. But I think year one is about casting that vision of winners win, I win, and then being able to project that into year two as well.
There we go. There we go. I was about to give you the rap signal because I know you got to go. I didn't want you to lose track of time. But,
I appreciate it, Dave.
Yeah, there we go, everybody. Will said he had a hard out at 9:30. He's 5 minutes late, so we're going to wrap it up right here. Will Miles at Will Miles SEC. Follow him on social media there, and of course, right here, I'm David Waters at GatorDave_GB. Right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown, guys and girls out there. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.